So, Mr. Rosen, does the First Amendment protect hate speech?
Absolutely.
What is hate speech? I mean, can you even define it as one person's hate speech and another person's love speech?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the truth. That's one of the reasons why you can't categorize it in such a way that you can regulate it. I am a member of a group called the Media Law Resource Center. They have a T-shirt that I proudly wear around, and it says, Congress shall make no law, and then on the other side it says that will abridge freedom of speech or of the press, and then it says, what don't you understand about no law? And to me, what Salman Rushdie was saying was where we need to go. Free speech is not free.
Professor Waldron, what becomes of society when free speech is used to generate such hatred for a group that it is impossible for that group to exercise its free expression of religion?
Yeah, people can be so frightened by the hatred that has been stirred up against them that they withdraw into themselves, they stay isolated, they avoid responding, they avoid engaging. The nightmare that lies behind hate speech regulation, and this is not to convince anybody, but just so we understand what all the other democracies in the world are doing with this, is fear of intercommunal violence. Fear that communities will erupt against each other, and that this can be inflamed not just by immediate acts of incitement, but by a slow-acting poison whereby it becomes harder and harder for people to live together.
Make the argument against legislative supremacy, which wants to criminalize certain speech.
The argument against it is based on the values that Salman was talking about and the values that Bruce just mentioned. I'm not comfortable making this argument, but the argument would be it's hard to define, it's hard to enforce. You can't necessarily rely on the wisdom of the officials and prosecutors who will bring this Canadian experience to show us.
But what do you do when an insular and discrete group, the Jewish people, the Catholics outside of Baltimore, whatever the case may be, cannot practice their religion because of the hatred generated by the use of free speech of people in the community that don't want these religious practices there? Does that justify interference with the speech?
In my view, it does. It doesn't make the interference constitutional because I think we've reached a point where legislative interference on this sort of activity would be unconstitutional. Think about that funeral. In the case of Snyder against Phelps, Westboro Baptist Church picketing a funeral. They didn't make the funeral impossible, but they made the funeral impossible as a private, bearable occasion for this family that had lost their son in Iraq. So, and apart from Justice Alito, your doppelganger, the Supreme Court held that no action for intentional infliction of emotional distress could lie against the Westboro Baptist Church.
All right, Mr. Rosen, how would you address this dilemma? Discrete and insular group, hatred heaped upon them, fear of practicing their religious values, an attitude amongst the legislature that, well, we got to push back on this freedom of speech a little bit. So we have a clash here. The freedom of speech, the free exercise of religion. Is freedom of speech a higher right just because it's mentioned first in the First Amendment?
Freedom of speech is not absolute, and
wait a minute, I thought you said it was absolute.
No, it's not absolute. I didn't say it was absolute. I was joking I was using the T-shirt example, but it's not absolute. And what the Supreme Court has done, with some reason and some intelligence, is to basically say, look, at the center we have political discourse, and that is absolutely protected. And then around that circle there's pornography, and there's libel, and there's commercial speech, and there's other kinds of speech that are limited in some way or fashion. I am not advocating for even some of those limits, but we have a regulatory system.
I want to know what kind of guidance you would give clients who come to you saying, we are in the business of disrupting speech. We're going to where anybody that defends NSA spying speaks publicly, and we're going to interrupt what they say because they are destroyers of the right to privacy. What kind of advice do you give those clients, Mr. Rosen?
Okay, well, I haven't had those clients, but if I did have those clients, I would say that there are ways to approach that without taking actions that can be regulated. And so the disruption needs to be in a organized fashion outside of actually creating a harassment situation or creating any sort of other situation where you might be subject to the law.
Professor Waldron, can you advise your clients to become martyrs to an unjust law and violate it?
You mean my clients, the hate speakers?
Yes, your clients that want to hear, well, let's say General Michael Hayden, the grand spy master of the Bush administration, is giving a speech in this hotel. And you and Rosen represent some people who lost their freedom because of what the NSA heard them say.
And they want to shut him down.
Correct.
Yeah.
Can you advise them ethically to become martyrs to this, not in the sense of bloody martyrdom, but in the sense of incarceration?
Right. I would advise them, first of all, that there are ways of shouting at somebody when they're giving a speech that don't amount to shouting them down. There used to be a case where people would heckle and the speaker would respond to the heckling. We've done away with that because we've lined up political choreography with national security. And so we assume that
Now,
if
what
anybody...
do you mean by that political choreography with national security?
So you have the handlers of the politician want the event to go just this way, and the heckler wants to hold up the argument and shout this and shout that, and that's going to disrupt the choreography. Now, in order to enforce the choreography, we decide for ourselves, well, any disorder in the audience is possibly presaging some sort of security threat or some sort of assassination. So we bring these two ideas together in an unholy alliance to stop the free speech of the hecklers. When I was a kid growing up in New Zealand, we would go along to political meetings and shout out this and shout out that at the Prime Minister, as it might be.
Right.
I was shouting once, this, that about public
Were you ever
spend.
restrained against your will?
I was never restrained, but I was restrained by the ridicule that the Prime Minister quite justifiably heaped upon me. He said, do you think there's some great fairy in the sky that creates the money to spend? And then he said, oh, I shouldn't have used the word fairy, he said. So that was answering a heckling with a homophobic slur.
But you come from a tradition, I think, that values this kind of interplay with hecklers.
That's right.
As an art form more so than we do here.
Once you did here. It
Yes,
used to be
once
more
we-
spontaneous, but
yes,
now
once we
everything's
did.
choreographed.
Yes,
And
once we did.
So what I say is, we lose sight of the fact that itself is limiting the exchange of ideas. That itself is limiting free speech.
Rabbi Yaffa, to the original question that I posited to your colleagues on the panel, the freedom of speech is being used to arouse hatred in the community, which in turn deters a discrete and insular minority, fill in the blank, the Jewish people, Catholic immigrants, whatever you want it to be, from freely practicing their religion. Can the speech be interfered with in order to liberate those who want to practice their religion?
So I would begin by quoting a 19th century responsa, which says that Jewish law prohibits gossip. And
You gotta be kidding.
you'll have to let me.
What else is that?
Time for confession.
Jewish law,
This is news. This is big news.
it is big news. First of all, the reason it prohibits it is because Jews are good at it. But let me, there's a crucial issue here, which is that even though we recognize freedom of speech, Judaic law and ethics, it's more ethics, cuts across the grain of our discussion here. Because we argue that anything you say should be useful, helpful, and good, no matter how many people it irritates. So Jewish law prohibits gossip, but the Pitzchei Tshuva, late 19th century responsa, goes on to say that all those who make such a tumult about the prohibition of gossip and slander, I make another tumult, which is the not revealing of the wrongdoing by the rich and the powerful because of the fear of gossip.
Can you silence the speech in order to liberate the free religious
So
practice?
this is exactly where I am going, and to comment on the Talmud, I need to bring Justice Black.
Justice Black, the ex-KKK guy?
Hold on, if you'll give me a moment.
Are you cheating? Is that some sort of a cheat sheet
No,
there?
this is my notes for tonight. That's
All
fair
right.
enough.
All right.
So he may have been ex-KKK, but he says, he makes 2 points in Dennis, in his dissent. First point, that clear and present danger is the only reason to stop speech. And secondly, that if you want to stop speech that is inconvenient, unpleasant, and annoying, so you're only going to be protecting speech that doesn't need protection anyways.
All right.
The Judaic take on that would be, clear and present danger is, if you cannot practice your religion in public, and I cannot practice my religion in public, not that it's uncomfortable, that I am afraid for my life and limb for doing so. If I am afraid of physical harm for going to synagogue,
Right.
that's clear and present danger,
And the
even
speech,
according to the Dennis
which creates
dissent.
the danger can be silenced.
But if it doesn't come down to physical danger, if it merely comes down to discomfort, we cannot stifle speech, because then the speech against the rich and powerful evildoing will also be stopped.
Mr. Rosen, where is that T-shirt? What part of no do they not
I
understand?
don't know. It sounds a lot like my mother when she used to say, if you don't have something nice to say about somebody, don't say anything.
She's a Talmudist.
Do you accept this Talmudic, based on Hugo Lafayette Black's dissent, clear and present danger argument?
Well,
Or do you really believe that no law, dear Bruce Rosen, my former client from 100 years ago, means no law?
no law means no law in most contexts. There are some contexts. There have to be some contexts.
Okay, so
Yeah,
here,
so I accept clear and present danger. I accept when somebody says, even on the radio, take out your machetes and go get the get the Hutus and go get them. You know, I think we're crossing
okay,
the line.
one of my favorite cases to talk about how many angels are in the head of a pin is Terminiello versus Chicago. The Reverend Father Arthur Terminiello, a radical follower of Senator Joseph McCarthy, gives a speech in a hall in Chicago in 1949. There are 1,600 people in the hall. 800 are his supporters, 800 want to kill him. And he intentionally arouses the crowd, and the 800 that want to kill him overpower the 800 that are his supporters, and they rush the stage, and the police whisk him away because they think he's going to be harmed by the crowd, and then they prosecute him. Not the crowd that rushed the stage, but him, for using insightful words in a situation where he created a clear and present danger. Supreme Court overturned it. Convicted all the way up the Illinois system, Supreme Court overturned it. It's Justice Robert Jackson's famous dissent, the Bill of Rights is not a suicide pact, about which much has been written. Was that a proper resolution of that case?
That he not be convicted?
Yes.
Yes, it was the proper resolution. I don't
Because-
know the case, but it's his words that must be examined.
In the same era, we have Shaplinsky versus New Hampshire, fighting words. Remember that one?
Right, I do.
A guy at a 4th of July parade was not particularly happy about the American flag, is insulting the American flag, and a fire marshal tells him to shut up. I'm going to tell you exactly what he said. It's not that bad. He says to the fire marshal, "Shut up, you goddamn fascist." Convicted under New Hampshire law. Upheld New Hampshire Supreme Court, upheld Supreme Court of the United States of America, fighting words. First Mr. Rosen, then the good professor. Would that be decided the same way today?
Absolutely not,
Why not?
because
Because we are more tolerant of fighting words today?
because it's not a fighting word today. We're way past that.
Professor Waldron.
And also, we would understand that the official to whom the words were directed has already sworn to uphold the peace, and and he's got to exercise some self-control. So there are such things as fighting words, and we need to pay attention, but not those words and not that target.
Rabbi Yaffe, is that not a defect in the clear and present danger argument because it's so subjective? What is a clear and present danger to a goddamn fascist in 1943 in New Hampshire is different from what is a clear and present danger to academics in Whippany, New Jersey in 2015.
I would say that from the perspective of Talmudic law, the issue has always been quite specific. And that is that if you are saying things that creates a situation in which people are not free to go about their lives as they ought to, Jewish law even includes invasion of privacy, by the way, sometimes as such a matter. But the bottom line is that people also are obliged by our ethical tradition
Right.
to have self-control. The fact that someone says something you detest, in other words, I reject utterly, from a Judaic perspective,
Right.
the idea of fighting words. Someone says something you don't like that angers you, it still says don't lift up your hand against your fellow.
Right.
Suck it up and go away, and meditate or have a drink or whatever it is that you do.
Okay.
Clear and present danger means the incitement to violence, the kind of thing that took place in all those riots in the 20s and 30s against African Americans
Right.
in the northern cities.
Okay, Brandenburg versus Ohio basically says this: all innocuous speech is absolutely protected, and all speech is innocuous when there is time for more speech to rebut it. Professor Waldron, if that is an accurate statement of the law, does Brandenburg just protect toothless speech?
Well, it does. If there's time for the speech to be rebutted, there's also got to be opportunity, which means psychological opportunity. It's got to be bearable and tolerable for the person who has been attacked to be able to make a response just then. And it's leaving out of contention one big category we haven't talked about. Bruce mentioned it at the very beginning of the discussion.
His T-shirt?
No, not the
Oh.
T-shirt. This is an anti-T-shirt exception. We believe it's wrong for people to libel each other, to defame each other. If the person who they're defaming is not a public official, but just an ordinary member of the public.
Right.
And we can understand hate speech as racial or religious defamation. I don't mean defamation of the religion now, I mean defamation of the believers. So somebody says, all Muslims are terrorists. Or somebody said, as they said in the case of Bohane against Illinois, which is 1952, African Americans all carry knives, they all engage in rape, they all smoke
No
marijuana.
Muslim is fit to be
Sounds like
president
Donald
of the
Trump.
United States. Somebody said that
That's
yesterday.
right, indeed, and that, again, it's defamatory. And we don't believe that, quite apart from the fighting words stuff, we don't believe that the First Amendment protects defamation of ordinary people.
All right.
That's what's childish about Rushdie's observation, that as soon as anybody mentions an exception, he wants to stop listening.
Okay.
And that's no way to think about an issue.